It's 3:17 in the morning, not 3:16, not 3:18, exactly 3:17. Your eyes suddenly open for no reason. The room is quiet, but your heart is racing like you just ran for your life. You reach for your phone to check the time, and for a split second the screen glitches. The numbers freeze. The air feels colder than it should. You tell yourself it's nothing, just another restless night. But what if I told you that somewhere in the Midwest, there's an abandoned industrial mill where every clock stopped at that exact moment, and the people who went inside came out different, if they came out at all? Tonight's story isn't about monsters hiding in the shadows. It's about the fears we carry every single day. The fear of failing, the fear of being forgotten, the fear that maybe life isn't turning out the way we thought it would. This is the story of 5 friends who chased an urban legend for fun, for content, for one last thrill before reality pulled them back into their ordinary lives. What they found instead was something that knew their secrets, something that didn't just haunt buildings, but haunted minds. So turn off the lights, put your phone on silent, and listen carefully, because once you hear what happened at Blackridge Mill, you might start checking the clock at night too. Jake never believed in ghost stories. He believed in overdue rent, unread emails, and the low battery warning that followed him everywhere like a personal curse. That Friday night, he was lying on his thrift store couch in his tiny Chicago studio, scrolling endlessly through short videos that all felt the same, when his phone buzzed with a notification from a group chat he hadn't seen active in almost a year. It was the old college chat they had once jokingly named Almost Famous, back when they still believed success was something you could just decide to achieve. The message was from Nelson. Of course it was. Nelson was the kind of guy who turned boredom into chaos and chaos into entertainment. Road trip tonight. Abandoned mill outside Riverfall. Urban legend vibes. One night only. Who's in? Reactions were already pouring in. Fire emojis. Skull emojis. Someone sent a meme about ghosts needing Wi-Fi passwords. Jake sighed and rubbed his face. He had work early the next morning at a job he didn't care about, and a life that felt like it had quietly stalled. Another night alone sounded heavier than the idea of chasing adrenaline in the middle of nowhere. Without thinking too hard, he typed, "I'm in." 2 hours later, he was riding shotgun in Nelson's dented SUV as city lights faded behind them and empty highway stretched endlessly ahead. The inside of the car smelled like fast food wrappers and cheap energy drinks. Nelson drove with one hand while holding his phone up with the other, narrating their late-night adventure to his live stream audience like he was already imagining the highlight reel. In the back seat, Mia and Connor were arguing about music, while Noah sat beside Jake staring out the window, like he was trying to make sense of the darkness rushing past. They hadn't all been together like this since graduation. Back then, they had talked about startups and travel plans and how they'd never settle for ordinary lives. Now they talked about rent increases, toxic workplaces, and the creeping anxiety that came with realizing adulthood wasn't a movie montage. Nelson joked about going viral. Mia complained about double shifts at the cafe. Connor admitted he might have to move back in with his parents. Jake mostly listened, feeling the strange comfort of knowing everyone else was just as lost as he was. They reached Riverfall close to midnight. The town felt like it had been left behind by time. Flickering streetlights illuminated empty sidewalks and closed storefronts. A buzzing neon sign outside a gas station cast an eerie glow across the cracked pavement. Nelson followed directions he'd saved from some online forum until the road turned from asphalt to gravel, and then to a narrow dirt path surrounded by overgrown weeds. That was when they saw it. Blackridge Mill stood in the distance like a rusted monument to something long forgotten. Broken windows stared out across the field like hollow eyes. A sagging chain-link fence surrounded the property, bent inward, as if something had forced its way through. Jake felt a cold ripple move through his chest. but he blamed the night air and the fact that he hadn't slept properly in days. Nelson grinned like a kid about to open a present. "This is going to be insane," he said, grabbing his flashlight and jumping out before anyone could second-guess the plan. Inside the fence, the ground was uneven and littered with debris. Weeds pushed through cracks in the concrete. Graffiti covered the outer walls of the mill in layers of warnings and jokes. Mia read one aloud in a sarcastic tone. "Don't stay after dark." "Yeah, okay." Connor laughed, but the sound echoed strangely like the building was mocking him. Jake noticed how quiet everything else was. No insects, no distant engines, just wind whispering through twisted metal. They stepped through a shattered doorway into a corridor that smelled like damp rust and burned plastic. Their phone flashlights created thin tunnels of visibility that barely cut through the darkness. Nelson kept talking to his viewers with forced enthusiasm, describing every broken pipe and crumbling staircase, like he was hosting a reality show. Jake wondered how many people were actually watching. Somehow that detail didn't matter. Being watched made Nelson fearless. They wandered deeper until they reached a vast turbine room, where the ceiling disappeared into shadow and a massive conveyor system stretched across the floor like the spine of some mechanical beast. The air grew suddenly colder. Jake could see his breath. Mia hugged herself and muttered that this wasn't funny anymore. Then came the first metallic clang from somewhere beyond the reach of their lights. Everyone froze. Another clang followed, louder, closer. The conveyor belt shuddered and then began to move with a slow, grinding rhythm. Connor swore under his breath. "There's no power here," he said. Nelson tried to laugh it off, but his voice cracked. Jake stared down at the dust covering the concrete floor and felt dread bloom inside him. Footprints were forming on it, one after another, as if something invisible was walking straight toward them. Fear didn't explode all at once. It crept in quietly, filling the spaces between their jokes and turning every shadow into a threat. They backed away, their lights shaking. Nelson insisted it had to be a prank set up by other thrill seekers. Mia tried calling for help, but her phone had no signal. Connor's battery dropped from 60% to 10 in less than a minute. Noah finally spoke, his voice low and steady. "We should go," no one argued. Finding the exit turned into a nightmare. Hallways looped back on themselves. Staircases ended at doors that hadn't been there before. Their flashlights flickered unpredictably, plunging them into moments of suffocating darkness. Each of them began to experience something different. Nelson heard his notification sound repeating endlessly somewhere behind him. Mia saw a figure at the end of a corridor waving desperately for help before vanishing into thin air. Connor muttered about seeing bank alerts flashing across his screen. Jake felt the crushing vision of himself years later, stuck in the same routine. Older and still unsure who he was supposed to be, they stumbled back into the turbine room without understanding how. The conveyor belt was moving faster now, sparks jumping from its edges. A row of old clocks mounted high on the wall suddenly flickered to life, all pointing to the same time. 3:17 a.m. Jake checked his phone. The numbers matched. The seconds ticked once, and then froze. Mia let out a hollow laugh. Nelson's live-stream comments began to fill with messages he couldn't read, the text glitching into meaningless symbols. Connor slammed his fist against a rusted panel. Noah stood perfectly still, watching the machinery like he was studying it. That was when Jake noticed the shape forming in the reflection of his cracked screen, a figure made of smoke and sparks rising slowly behind them, faceless, silent, patient. It didn't need to chase them. It knew panic would do the work. Arguments erupted. Accusations followed. They blamed Nelson for bringing them there. They blamed each other for agreeing to come. The noise of their shouting mixed with the roar of grinding metal until it felt like the building itself was screaming. Jake realized the truth in a sudden flash of clarity. The mill wasn't trapping them physically. It was trapping their fears. He shouted for them to listen, his voice nearly lost in the chaos. Noah stepped forward first and powered off his phone. The simple click sounded louder than any scream. The conveyor slowed slightly. Nelson hesitated before ending his live stream and deleting the app he had built his identity around. Mia ripped up the folded job offer she had been carrying for weeks. Connor emptied his pockets onto the floor, letting overdue notices scatter. Jake raised his phone one last time and smashed it against the concrete. The screen shattered and the smoky figure dissolved like mist. A door none of them had noticed before creaked open at the far end of the room. Pale dawn light spilled inside, soft and unreal. They walked toward it together, exhausted but strangely calm. Outside, the air felt warmer. Birds chirped in the distance as if nothing had happened. Nelson leaned against the SUV, staring at his empty hands. Mia laughed weakly. Connor lit a cigarette with shaking fingers. Noah closed his eyes and took a long breath. Jake looked back once at the looming shape of Blackridge Mill and felt certain that some part of them would always remain there. They drove back toward the city in silence as the sun rose behind them, painting the sky in quiet shades of gold. Life eventually returned to normal, but not completely. Nelson stopped chasing viral fame and started making videos about real struggles. Mia enrolled in night classes. Connor faced his financial problems head-on. Jake began writing again. Still, sometimes he wakes suddenly at night, convinced he hears the distant grind of machinery. He checks the clock and sees 3:17 glowing faintly before the numbers change. He tells himself, it's just a glitch, just a memory, refusing to fade. But deep down, he knows places like that don't disappear. They wait patiently for the next group of restless souls, searching for meaning in the dark. If you made it all the way to the end, take a moment right now and look around you. Notice how quiet your room feels. Notice how loud your own thoughts suddenly sound. Stories like this don't stay inside abandoned buildings. They follow us home. They live in the small doubts we try to ignore, and the late-night worries we pretend don't exist. And maybe that's what makes them truly terrifying. So here's something I want you to do before you leave this video. Drop a comment telling me what time it is where you are right now. Not just the hour, the exact minute. Because you never know. Someone else watching might see the same number at the same moment. And if you enjoy dark psychological horror that feels a little too real, make sure you subscribe and stay close. There are many more stories waiting in the shadows, and the next one might be even closer to home. Until next time, try to get some sleep. And if you wake up suddenly in the middle of the night, don't check the clock.